What's up guys, Asian here again with another Build Basics video, and today we're going to be going over weapon enchants. Specifically, how do they work, how do they proc, because Murkmire did bring a couple of changes with how they work, so this is just going to kind of be an update video so you guys can better understand what will cause an enchant to proc and what will not cause an enchant to proc. So you'll see that I did move where my face cam is, and that's just because we are going to be making use of the live combat metrics combat log down in the chat window below. So make sure to keep an eye on that, because that's where I'm going to be kind of pointing to when I'm sort of explaining how enchants are proccing and things like that. So the first thing that we're going to cover is what exactly are your weapon enchants. So they're basically enchants that you can place on your weapon. They fall basically under three categories. The first one is going to be damage enchants, and these are going to be pretty basic. These are things like your absorb stamina enchant, your poison damage enchant, your flame damage enchant. They just deal straight damage. These enchants have a base cooldown of 4 seconds, and with Infused that basically brings it down to a 2-second cooldown. The second type of enchant is known as a buff enchant. So these enchants, as the name implies, just buff you directly. So in this case we have a weapon damage enchant, but there are a few other enchants that fall under the buff category, hardening being the other one that you'll probably see most often. As the name implies, it just buffs you, so weapon damage gives you more weapon damage, and spell damage, hardening gives you a damage shield. These have a cooldown that's going to be longer than your damage enchant. So the base cooldown for these types of enchants are 9 seconds. So with Infused it drops down to 4.5 seconds. And finally, we have our final types of enchant, which is, if I can find one, debuff enchants here. So you can see here on the Ice Staff of Alkash here that we have Crusher. This basically debuffs the enemy. So another very common enchant that you might see that's a debuff enchant would be a weakening enchant that reduces the target's weapon and spell damage. So those debuff enchants, again, just name implies, just debuffs whatever you happen to hit. Now, very similar to the buffing enchants, they have a 9-second cooldown default, which with Infused drops it down to 4.5 seconds. So those are basically your three different types of enchants. So as you can see, the buff and debuff enchants have a longer cooldown because they're generally going to be a little bit more powerful, just in terms of utility, compared to damage enchants. That doesn't mean damage enchants are any weaker, it's just they share different cooldowns and they basically operate differently. Now, enchants proc off of 3 different conditions. First one being light attacks, second one being heavy attacks, and the third one being any non-single target damage over time weapon ability. The key important thing here is the fact that I did mention weapon ability. So, if we go ahead and take a look now on the bottom right hand side, because we are going to be looking at the Berserker Enchant now. That's not going to show up on our combat log. So our Berserker Enchant is on our back bar, it's on our bow bar right now. So I did mention that it has to be a weapon damage ability in order for your Berserker Enchant to go off. So if I use Caltrops, for instance, which is not a weapon damage ability, it's not a weapon ability. So weapon abilities are basically anything that falls under Destruction Staff, Bow, Dual Wield, One Hand, Two Hand. Restoration Staff abilities cannot proc enchants, because in order for an enchant to proc, you need to deal damage, and currently none of the Restoration Staff abilities cause damage to an enemy, so you can't proc enchants using the Resto Staff. But you can see there that on the right hand side of the screen and on our buffs, we don't have any sort of enchant. We did not proc our Berserker Enchant. However, if I use Endless Hail, you'll see that we did happen to proc our Berserker Enchant on the right hand side. And now once the Berserker Enchant is over, basically wait for the cooldown to reapply itself, and then it'll reapply itself once the cooldown is over at about 9 seconds. Now, buff and debuff enchants have a duration of about 5 seconds. So if you have an Infused, let's say weapon damage enchant, that brings the cooldown down to 4.5 seconds with a 5-second duration, which means you can have 100% uptime on weapon damage. So with this bow, I have an Urnhone bow because I haven't had a chance to change it to Infused yet, but you can see here that our Berserker Enchant had a 60% uptime, so that's pretty much on the money here with a 10-second duration for combat. Basically that's as long as the duration of Endless Hail versus a 5-second cooldown or 5-second duration. It's pretty much on the money there. It's a little bit over because we did happen to have a second proc of Berserker on that last second. So we had 6 seconds versus a 10-second duration. So that's pretty much what we would expect to see if we were basically able to proc Berserker on cooldown. Now, I did mention that it can't be a single target dot, so if I go ahead and use Poison Injection here, we'll find that Poison Injection, that first hit, did happen to proc our Berserker Enchant. However, you will find that we do not actually proc Berserker Enchant again. So, with Endless Hail and Poison Injection, both of them last 10 seconds. With Endless Hail, when our 9 seconds cooldown was up, we procced Berserker a second time. However, with Poison Injection, once our 9-second cooldown was up, we did not happen to proc Berserker a second time. So if we take a look here, we only had one proc of Berserker using just Poison Injection versus 2 procs of Berserker when we used Endless Hail. So this was a change that was made fairly early on in Murkmire patch, where single target dots do not proc enchants at all. So that would be things like Rending Slashes, Poison Injection, Destructive Clench, and the kind of reasoning behind that was when you combine something like Rending Slashes with Torug's Pact with enchants on 2 seconds, basically almost 2 seconds cooldown, it just ended up being very powerful for PvP, so they just made it so single target dots do not proc enchants at all. However, if a single target dot does have a direct damage component, then that direct damage component will proc enchants. So the first hit of Poison Injection, first hit of Rending Slashes, those are all direct damage components, and those will proc enchants. It's the damage over time that will not proc enchants. Now, enchants will proc on whatever bar you're on. So if I were to use Endless Hail right now and swap my front bar, you will find that I will proc my Berserker Enchant. You will find that I am not proccing any of my damage enchants that I currently have on my front bar here. So we have Berserker proc again, even though I'm not on my back bar. So enchants will remember to proc if you are using something like Endless Hail or Blockade of Fire or Blockade of Storms. Your back bar enchant will still proc even if you're on your front bar. And the same does go for your front bar enchants as well. So something like Blade Cloak, for instance, I can swap my bar to my back bar here, and you'll find that I'm still getting my enchants off even though I'm on my back bar and I don't have my poison or absorbed stamina enchant on my back bar. So as long as it is not a single target dot, if you are not on that bar, you'll still be able to proc your enchants. Now you will notice that I did not happen, every single hit of Blade Cloak here did not proc both of our enchants on my front bar here. So when I did my first hit with Blade Cloak, both of my enchants were on cooldown, however only one enchant procs. And that's basically something that they did to kind of balance out PvP. So previously, if I were to use Blade Cloak here, it would actually proc both of my enchants at the same time, of course increasing burst damage in PvP. In PvE, this doesn't really matter too much, it just increases your DPS a little bit. But they changed it so you can only proc one enchant per hit. So Blade Cloak with dual wield, I'm not proccing both of my enchants at the same time, I'm only proccing one at a time. So then you can see here at my second Blade Cloak hit, I hit Poison Weapon, and then Blade Cloak again, absorbs Blade Cloak hit again, and that had Absorb Stamina, and Absorb Stamina again, and Poison Weapon. So the problem here is that because Absorb Stam and Poison Weapon both shared the same cooldown, and Blade Cloak hits every 3 seconds. They are both on cooldown, so it just picked randomly. So if both enchants are on cooldown, it will pick a random enchant to proc. So you can see here that it procced Absorb Stam and then Poison Weapon, and it decided to proc Absorb Stam more often than it procced Poison Weapon. However, if you are doing something like this, where you're light attack weaving the whole time, again, you will not proc both enchants at the same time. However, you will basically prioritize which enchant to proc based on which one is off cooldown. So because there's now a delay between, or rather a time difference between cooldowns, I'll always proc Absorb Stam on one hit and then Poison Weapon the next hit, and so on and so forth. And you kind of see that reflected here in the combat log. Now you can see here that I am using an axe. Twin Blade and Blunt does not proc enchants. It is only light attacks, heavy attacks, and weapon abilities here. So that's pretty much everything you have to really know about the proc conditions behind enchants. So basically they remember whether or not they're infused or not. So if we take a look here at this particular setup here, we had Absorb Stam hit for 4,003. And if we go back all the way up back to our Blade Cloak procs, Observed stamina 4032. This is a little bit of a change because of the way the damage is calculated, but enchants do remember which hand they are procced on, which traits and things like that. So if you have an infused weapon damage enchant trait on your back bar and you use Endless Hail, swap to your front bar, it'll remember that it is an infused enchant, so you'll still get the infused strength and you will still get the infused cooldown. So you don't have to worry about not having infused on your front bar at all. You'll still remember that it is an infused enchant basically. So that's pretty much all you really have to know with enchants. So the main takeaway points here are that damage enchants, anything that deals damage, has a 4-second default cooldown. Buff and debuff enchants have a 9-second default cooldown. Single target dots do not proc enchants. The only things that proc enchants are going to be light attacks, heavy attacks, and weapon skills. So again, weapon skills are anything that falls under your weapon skill line, with the exception of restoration staff abilities, because restoration staff abilities do not deal damage, so it has to deal damage. So single target dots, for example, destructive touch, rending slashes, twin slashes, they do not proc enchants. They're only going to be direct damage components of those abilities that proc enchants. If you are dual wielding, then each enchant is independent of each other. They do not share cooldowns at all, and it will basically prioritize whichever enchant is off cooldown in order to proc. In most scenarios, this basically means you will be swapping on and off. It'll be the one enchant and then another enchant because of that time difference, the time delay. But you will never have both hands proccing at the same time. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys have any questions about how enchants work, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.